Content warning. Episodes of Gray Matter may contain themes and depictions of extreme mental illness, traumatic bodily harm, and death. If you aren't in the right headspace to engage with those depictions right now, maybe this episode should wait for another time. Otherwise, proceed with caution.
Hello again, welcome back to Gray Matter Video. I'm actually pretty happy you came in today. It's been quiet as the grave in here. Funny expression, quiet as the grave, and you never seem to hear it anymore unless someone wants to use it as an excuse to go into a long-winded monologue. The dead can be so loud, as long as you want to listen. Everything we have, every scrap of knowledge and technical method, was left for us by someone who came before, fought for and died for by people we would call savages. Our culture, our history, everything we have was provided by the memories of the dead. But can you imagine how much knowledge has been lost? How many times a genius died working in a sweatshop? How many times the great American novel was used to kindle a garbage fire? Knowledge has to be patient. It is created, duplicated, forgotten, and then, sometimes, when the wind is right, it's rediscovered. Actually, that reminds me of a tape. It's called The Circle of Viy, and it's a good old-fashioned spook show with a bit of a modernist twist. Go in with an open mind, and you might just learn something. But be careful. Knowledge isn't always a blessing.
The Circle of Viy, written and directed by Jonathan Inbody, based on the novella Viy by Nikolai Gogol.
I was always smart, and being smart meant being skeptical. No matter how many times I heard the same stories, ghosts, demons, vampires, werewolves, I never believed them. It's not that I didn't want to. I found the stories endlessly fascinating, but eventually it always reaches a point where it becomes impossible to prove. If it's not testable, repeatable, measurable, then it doesn't exist, regardless of what any breathless believer wants to tell you. That singular axiom, my firmly held conviction that objective truth is the only thing that matters, is what got me my current job at the Bureau. As it turns out, the federal government is just as curious about the supernatural as you or I, but they don't want to spend a lot of time or money investigating it. And they certainly don't want some doe-eyed believer letting their faith get in the way of the cold, hard facts. I had investigated and subsequently debunked more cases of the supposed paranormal than anyone in the history of the FBI. So it was no surprise to me when a file came across my desk that described a mysterious death with signs of the ritualistic occult. The dead woman, still currently unidentified, had been found in an abandoned cannery, lying inside of a chalk circle surrounded by candles. Now, she was sitting inside the morgue at Quantico, waiting for my examination. I stepped off the elevator and shivered, then slipped on my lab coat. There was an agent waiting for me with a clipboard, who looked up and nodded at me in greeting.
You must be Agent Cuomo.
That's right.
I laid out the Jane Doe for you. Everyone else should be in a cooler. I'm kind of surprised you're doing the autopsy yourself. Most of the field agents wouldn't be caught dead down here. Pardon the pun.
I was almost a surgeon before the Bureau got their hooks in me. Sometimes I miss it.
What's not to miss? The smell of formaldehyde, glassy-eyed corpses looking up at you while you take a rib splitter to them. I'm living the dream down here.
I like the simplicity of it. You always know what to expect.
Maybe not with this one. No obvious cause of death, minimal rigor mortis, those tattoos.
Tattoos?
You haven't seen her?
Just the crime scene photos. I wanted to go in fresh.
It's the weirdest thing. Full body tattoos everywhere except her face and hands. It's like she didn't want anyone to see them when she was out in public. Most of them seem to be self-applied, too. Do you really think this is a cult thing? Like she was a sacrifice or something?
I don't know yet. If it was, then it's an awful waste of life.
Here we are. Take your time. I told security you'd probably be here all night. Hope it's alright if I duck out a little early. I got everything set up for you already, so you should be good to go.
It's no problem. Like you said, I'll probably be in here all night. There's no reason for you to lose sleep, too. Thanks again.
My pleasure, Agent. Hope you find something.
Yeah, you and me both. I waited a moment after he left, then turned and looked around the room. The morgue was large, empty, and sterile, with 2 walls of body coolers opposite a long row of cabinets of medical equipment. In the center of the room was the body, lying covered by a blue sheet atop a simple gurney. Next to her was a small side table of surgical tools and a digital recorder. This is Agent Michael Cuoma. It is August 6th, about 8:45 p.m. I'm going to be performing the autopsy on Jane Doe MG1835-U. The first thing I notice upon taking the sheet off the body is the extensive tattoos. They look like lines of letters or symbols or hieroglyphics or something similar, and they cover nearly every inch of her exposed skin, including her breasts and pubis. The only places left clear are her face, neck, and hands. Most of them seem to have been done with a steady hand, but without professional equipment. There's another small patch of exposed skin on her stomach. There's a line of symbols tattooed in a circle about 2 inches around her navel, and there are no tattoos present inside. If there is a religious or occult significance to these tattoos, then we may be looking at a fertility ritual or some other ceremony that places symbolic meaning on the umbilical cord. I'm not sure yet. Like my colleagues, I see no obvious cause of death. Heart failure seems likely, but she seems too young without some underlying condition. Her eyes have taken on a frosty blue color, with fully dilated pupils and ordinary whites. It's like she was just switched off. It's strange, but... Hello? Is someone there? Whoever it is transcribing this recording, I hope that you can figure out what that sound was. If you do, please tell me, because I have no idea. Jesus! I darted my eyes back and forth, scanning the room for any sign of what had made the sound. Finally, my gaze fell on the door to one of the body coolers, hanging open and slowly moving back and forth. It swung gently outward, then suddenly swung back and slammed shut. Mystery solved. It's just one of the cooler doors. It must have been left open, then swung closed in the, well, not breeze exactly, but the pressure change from the temperature control. Oh, there we go. Broken latch. I looked up from the cooler I had just closed at the wall in front of me. I could see vague reflections on the surface of the metal, of the room, the small table beside the gurney, A shiver ran down my spine. In the metal reflection, I could see the dead woman's body on the gurney. It was sitting straight up. I whirled around. The body was just where I had left it lying, uncovered and still, Her pale skin was almost glowing in the bright fluorescent light, as if the only things keeping her from bursting into white flame were the zigzagging lines of black tattoos. Hello? Is someone in here? For the courtesy of the transcriber, I thought I saw someone in here just now. It turns out I didn't. Continuing on, I'm going to make a Y incision and then remove the ribs and examine the organs in situ. Hopefully the heart will show some sign or abnormality. Might not want to listen for the next couple of seconds. Oh, shit. Hello?
Is this Agent Cuomo? This is Professor Tybury from Boston.
Professor, thank you for getting back to me. Did you get the book I sent you?
I've just been looking it over. Do you have time to talk?
Sure. I've got you on speaker. I'm in the middle of an autopsy, but I'm still prepping the body, so I can talk for a few minutes.
I can call back.
No, it's all right. We're being recorded, so this'll be in the transcript. It'll save me the trouble of taking notes.
It seems I had good timing then.
Sure did. What have you got for me?
Well, you were right. The book was written in Ukrainian. The grammar is outdated, almost Shakespearean. If you don't mind my asking, where did you get it?
It was found in the personal effects of a Jane Doe, along with a bunch of textbooks on theoretical physics and spatial geometry. She's who I'm examining now, actually.
You don't have any idea who she is?
None. Why?
Because this book, I think I might know what it is, but if I'm right, well, if it's what I think it is, then it shouldn't even exist. Oh, what was that?
A rib. Sorry, that's going to happen a couple more times. Go ahead and tell me about the book.
Well, in the Middle Ages, there were these books called grimoires, spell books, and summoning rituals for gods and devils.
I'm familiar.
What a lot of people don't know is that grimoires are actually much older, or sometimes adapted from much older books or scrolls. They've been found in almost every region of the world throughout every technology level. Some, like the Lesser Key of Solomon, have been preserved through the ages, but others, well, they just vanished.
And you think that book is one of those?
It's possible. It's probably not an original copy. It looks old, but it's not that old. But the text itself, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Some of it's Ukrainian, some Moldovan, some Greek. Some of it didn't even mean anything to me when I first looked at it. It's just symbols. I really hate that sound.
Sorry. So the book's owner, or writer, they copied stuff down from other grimoires, added their own flavor?
No. I think it's all one book, like they copied it down word for word, but the text they were copying it from was already a patchwork. Some of the other grimoires are written in multiple languages, like the Necronomicon or the De Vermis Mysterious, but I think this is the Arctis Pravda. Are you all right?
Yes. There's, a draft.
That's some draft.
So, the Arctis Pravda, it's a lost book?
Not just lost, destroyed. It was supposedly written by a blind monk somewhere in Eastern Europe in maybe the 10th century. It was passed around between royals, apparently. Then it abruptly vanished after some duke performed a ritual from it and died. Somehow the alchemists got it and tried to mass produce it, but according to legend, the monks they were paying to duplicate it all went, well, insane. Only 4 copies were ever made. After that, it's all hearsay. Every couple of centuries, someone says they had their hands on a copy of it. It becomes a white whale for rare book collectors. The last time there were even rumblings of it was in Romania in the early 80s. Apparently a copy was intercepted by some of Ceausescu's secret police, and because he wanted to make friends with the USSR, and they have less than a favorable view of religion, it was disposed of.
Yeah, but all this rare curse bullshit has that kind of story around it. What makes this book so different?
I didn't think it was different. but having it in my hands, reading it, those symbols I told you about, the ones I thought were gibberish when I first read it, they're not. They're not magic spells or summoning rituals or even poetry. It's math.
What?
It's math. Algebra, geometry, physics, but some of it you can kind of figure out. There are formulas for calculating perimeter, area, volume, the basic building blocks of spatial geometry, but there's also, I don't even know what to call it. It's so far beyond me.
Well, that isn't all that irregular. The Mayans and the Arabs had a pretty good grasp of mathematics before.
You're not listening to me. It's not advanced for its time. It's advanced, period. It's like cheat codes for physics. Ways to make impossible shapes, warp and fold space like it was paper. And the parts that aren't math, the things they describe in the prose. It's not talking about gods or demons. It's talking about other planes, other dimensions, ways to access them, to pierce the veil between spaces and draw things out.
Things? What do you mean, things?
Okay, let me put it like this. Reality is math, right? Everything, fundamentally, is built on a million little calculations every second. Motion feeds gravity. Gravity gathers matter into stars and planets. Living things form out of the symbiosis of electricity and organic development. So, it's like the base code of a computer program. The people who wrote this book, they thought they had discovered the programming language that the universe was built on. And they wanted to use it to bend reality around them.
You mean like magic?
No, I don't. I mean like a hacker exploiting glitches in a computer program. Only the program that's running is objective reality. They wanted to open up the source code and let the glitches run rampant.
And these glitches are?
Creatures? Things from outside reality, exempt to its rules. Blasphemies against science itself. There are hundreds of them listed here, things that just shouldn't exist. Monsters made of entropy and higher dimensional things that feed on the probability field, living event horizons that can reduce anything inside them to strings and atoms.
So, my Jane Doe. She's part of a group that wants to use this book to break down reality, usher in some mathematical apocalypse so they can rebuild the universe in their own image. Okay, that I get. But how does she end up dead in a chalk circle in an abandoned building with no visible signs of struggle or obvious cause of death?
Are you expecting me to know?
No, sorry. I started thinking out loud. Just, can you keep reading it? See if you can find anything about a circle?
That I can do.
Thank you, Professor. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got more ribs to break.
Don't let me stop you. I'll call you back if I find anything.
Well, if someone did kill her, then we've got a motive. A fellow cultist, or whatever they call themselves, got angry that their little ritual didn't work, and what? Gave her poison that didn't cause any organ damage? Scared her into having a heart attack? I hope I'm entertaining you, whoever you are that's transcribing this. This is, even for me, this is a weird one. Before I continue, I think I'm going to take a closer look at some of Jane Doe's tattoos. The ME took some high-res pictures. They should be in the report. Let's see if there's anything I can gather, now that the good professor's given me some context. I'm looking at a photo of the tattooless circle around the girl's navel. Something about it is still drawing my attention. Looking at the ring of symbols again, I can see what Tybury meant. Some of it looks like letters and words, but other pieces look like numbers plugged into a formula. A hell of a thing for a cult to be centered around. Most religions don't want their members to check whether or not everything adds up. There's a string of letters that keeps repeating as I flip through the photographs. It's spread out all over the tattoos, nestled inside lines of gibberish. It's present at the top of the circle around the navel, too. Where's that Cyrillic alphabet sheet? There. Now let's see if I can figure out what it spells. Viy. Vey, or V, or however it's pronounced. This word or name, it's present in almost every string of letters and numbers, like it's their god or something. The great and powerful Viy, god of impossible numbers. Again with the cooler. Let me just... All over the coolers there. And there go the lights. If this is someone's idea of a joke, I'm not laughing. Hello? I scanned the room, squinting to make out shapes in the darkness. Without the lights on, there was nothing but black. Then I saw faint hints of green light rising up from the gurney and instantly dissipating. They were letters, numbers. Bits of the dead woman's tattoos were switching on and off like Christmas lights. The shreds of boreal green grew brighter and brighter, rising up off the body and swirling around each other in interlocking lines. Suddenly, the dead woman's eyes opened, casting twin pillars of green light up to the ceiling. A low, throaty moan rose out from between her blue lips, and her rigged arms and legs began to shake. As I stepped back in cautious fear, the body rose off the gurney and hung in midair. Plumes of glowing fog billowed out from the inside of her splayed-open chest and spilled out onto the floor. I pressed myself against the wall, my eyes fixed on the floating corpse, and at that moment I knew. I had to get out of here. I slowly sidled along the wall towards the door, feeling out in front of me with my hands to make sure I didn't collide with anything in the dark. The green fog was getting closer now, drifting outward like an unrolled blanket over the tiled floor. It curled around the heels of my shoes, then spilled over and rose up the wall behind me in soft waves. I reached the door, or at least I thought I did. The handle was there, but the seam where the door met the frame was gone. It was smooth all the way around, like there had never even been an opening there. Only the frame and handle installed onto the side of a solid wall. Glitches. Reality was changing around me. Being changed. Tiberi was right, more than he could have possibly known. The shreds of green light surrounding the body solidified into horizontal and vertical lines, then coalesced into glowing shapes, spreading throughout the room like wireframe models in a simulation. There were pyramids folded over pyramids, cones that spiraled inward until it was too small for the naked eye to see. A spinning cube inside an infinite number of cubes. Each line that made up the shapes was a string of numbers and letters, shifting and jittering in a loop with the clunky, shuddering motion of a conveyor belt. The surface of the fog covering the floor began to ripple, sending flashing white patches of lightning dancing across tiny clouds. Then, near the center of the room, a monstrous arm shot up from inside the mist. It was thin and metallic, with two prong-like claws at the end of a boxy hand. Another metallic arm shot up to join it, then both reached down and dug their clawed fingers into the tiled floor. The arm strained and flexed, pulling up a jagged metal torso with spike-covered shoulders. At the center of the chest sat a long, headless neck, topped with an unblinking and unmistakably organic eye. Two thin, triple-jointed legs rose up underneath it, and as I watched, it began to slink forward like a panther, shuddering as if animated in stop motion as it swayed from side to side. The metal creature's bulging eye flitted back and forth, dripping bits of slimy organic lubricant as it scanned the room. With each uneven step, Its outstretched claws punctured the tiled floor. Its body swayed back and forth in bizarre rhythm, pivoting on its clawed feet like a feline ballerina. And though it tottered, it never fell. What in the hell? The creature's bulging eye met mine, and I felt myself go weak at the knees. I collapsed to the floor, then felt a hideous tug as some unseen force pulled me across the tiles towards the one-eyed abomination. I reached out with both hands for something to steady myself, anything to keep me from sliding closer to that jagged thing. As I watched, my hands were aging, veins thinning and skin drying up and cracking as years were sucked out of them. I opened my mouth to scream, but an old man's voice came out.
Please, please don't.
Suddenly, an invisible wave slammed into my back and sent me skidding into the wall, finally free of the creature's fell gravity. As I rolled back to my feet and tried to get my bearings, I could feel my limbs loosening, blood flowing, and skin changing color as my energy returned. I looked over at the spot where the one-eyed thing had just been and shuddered. The creature had been crushed, its metal body splintered into half-viscous pieces, and standing atop the pile of shredded metal was another abomination. This one was in the shape of a gigantic bird, fanning out two wings of shimmering glass as it picked at the dead panther thing with its taloned feet. Its head was something else altogether, like the beak of a squid surrounded by densely packed quills of a porcupine. Underneath the beak were two antler-like prongs, sticking out in front of it like tusks as it lifted its eyeless head to face me. I turned to run, then realized with horror that my feet weren't touching the ground. They were sinking down through the tile as it bubbled up like boiling quicksand, and I felt myself pulled downward as I thrashed in a desperate frenzy. The bird thing flapped its stained glass wings and the room flexed around it, the walls and ceiling warping into a spiral cone as the thing dove towards me. A formless tendril shot out of the mist and wrapped around one of the bird creature's legs, then pulled it down towards a circular mouth rising up from underneath the fog. The mouth's countless rows of teeth began to spin like interlocked chainsaws, and I watched it shred the bird thing's legs as it screamed in mechanical terror. I scrambled back and pressed myself against the wall, unable to look away as more and more of the impossible things began to rise up out of the fog. They tore at each other like unreal animals, spilling out across the room in a frenzied cannibalistic stampede. I slid across the floor into a corner, then pulled up my legs and curled into a terrified ball. There was something about them, about how fundamentally wrong they were, that stabbed at my eyes like knives and grated against my ears. It was like I was staring into hell itself, a hell of things that should not be. I looked down at my hands again. They were coming apart, nails separating from fingers, skin peeling off, and muscle unwinding to reveal interlocked bone. I was being disassembled, piece by awful piece. The room began to warp around me, tiles growing and shrinking randomly as the ceiling curved outward. My eyesight blurred as my corneas stretched and separated from my pupils, and a kaleidoscope of colored light danced across my smearing vision. My mouth fell open, and I screamed, unable to form a coherent word as each fraction of my tongue split into a million microscopic pieces.
Viy!
I opened my eyes. The room around me was back to normal, sterile and mostly empty, lit only by dull fluorescent lights. At the center of the room, the body sat limply on the gurney, flaps of skin on its chest peeled back to leave her ribcage and organs visible. Across the room, I could see the door.
Is
Did... Hello? Is someone there?
Agent Cuomo? Are you alright?
Tybury?
Yeah, it's me. Sorry to call you again so late, but I couldn't sleep, so I translated more of the book. How did the autopsy go?
How did it go?
Weren't you going to keep working on it after our last call? That was only 9:30. It's after 2 now.
What?
Are you alright? Did something happen?
Yeah, you might say something did.
What do you mean?
Oh, nothing. I had a nightmare. I fell asleep and I had a nightmare.
I can call back.
No! Oh, I mean, no, it's fine. Just tell me what you found.
Well, I think I found something that could be important. The circle, as a symbol, is repeated throughout the text over and over, along with a word I couldn't translate. At first I thought it was an invocation, like chanting a god's name to gain their favor. But the more I looked at it, I don't think that's it at all. It's not a summoning, it's a warning. This word, this being, it's not their god. It's more like their devil. They were so afraid of it that they wouldn't even speak its name.
Let me guess. It's called Viy.
That's right. How did you...
Lucky guess. This Viy, what is it?
As far as I can tell, and working off my programming metaphor from before, it's the thing that fixes glitches. The prose keeps warning against doing too much, changing too much, or Viy will awaken. He'll quarantine and destroy the glitches, keep the corrupted code from spreading, and he doesn't seem too concerned about the damage he'll do to accomplish it. They're talking about entire cities destroyed, just wiped off the map. His only job, his purpose, is to keep the simulation from crashing.
Is there a way to protect yourself? To keep Viy from coming?
Well, funny you should ask that, because I think I can shed some light on your Jane Doe. Every time Viy is mentioned in the text, the circle is nearby, and there's this phrase, the circle protects. It's in there over and over, and I think I have it figured out. When they're writing code, a programmer will always put in a failsafe, but that failsafe, it's not perfect. Sometimes it stops processes that it shouldn't, or it deletes a string of code that's needed elsewhere in the program. So the programmer puts in a workaround, something simple, a quick way to shut down or redirect the failsafe so the program doesn't lock them out.
Am I supposed to be able to follow this?
Think of it like this. The things from outside are the glitches. Viy is the failsafe and the circle is the workaround. Your Jane Doe drew the chalk circle around herself because she believed that, for one reason or another, it would protect her from Viy. And if Viy was real, then it would. Or at least according to the text.
The circle?
Are you sure you're all right?
No, but...
Agent Cuomo, what's going on? Are you...
The world slowed to a terrifying stop. The room was still, perfectly still, and when I looked up at the door, I found it was gone. Then the tiles were gone too, the floor dropping out from underneath me and plunging down into an infinite abyss. The walls exploded outward, shredding into atoms that fizzled into nothing, and when the gurney dropped into the black chasm beneath me, it only left Jane Doe and I, floating, alone, in the dark. Her body started glowing again, her tattoos flashing vibrantly green as they lifted off of her flesh. They floated out into the dark, rippling with light like emerald constellations, and beneath them, her body began to pull itself apart, slowly stretching and warping as each cross-sectioned layer of skin, flesh, and bone separated itself and drifted upward. I looked up past the twinkling green shapes into the endless black, where an impossibly gigantic mass was lowering to meet us. It was almost indescribable and interwoven, ever-rippling combination of solid shapes and intangible prisms, moving back and forth around and through each other to form a bestial colossus of black obsidian. It towered over us like a skyscraper, stretching out countless arms at its sides like rays of black sunlight. The charred silver squares that made up its chest slid back and forth in a churning, continual rearrangement, slowly forming familiar shapes and then immediately dissolving them into a ferrofluid blob of living metal. Atop the expansive chest sat a huge ovular head made up of millions of hexagonal prisms, swirling in rippling waves like a boiling cloud as they built themselves up into rotating hives and broke apart again. At the center of the ever-changing head was a glowing core of pure blinding white, pulsing like a strobe as the head tilted down to look at me. Beside me, Jane Doe's body had been reduced to burning atoms, surrounded by a swirling sea of twinkling green light that was slowly condensing into one sphere-like bulb. The hexagonal cloud that seemed to be the giant thing's head began to vertically split, revealing a thin beam of piercing light that widened into a pillar. As the sides of its head churned and bubbled like boiling liquid, I felt my mind begin to fray. Memories sprang up in my mind and were pulled apart, then smashed together and torn out of me like malformed scabs. I was being unraveled like a ball of yarn, my body dissected as the folds of my brain were smoothed over and bleached clean. The great god Viy, reality's antivirus, was taking me apart. I reached out with disassembling hands, grabbing at the green letters and symbols floating all around me. There had to be some formula, some way to make it stop. The circle. I clutched a symbol in my burning hands and bent it, pulling its lines into rough angles as I twisted it into the shape that I needed. I smoothed over the hard edges, bent pieces to reinforce the curve. The light from Viy's hideous gaze was pouring down on me like molten metal, burning through my head and shoulders as I raised the green circle over my head and lowered it around my neck and down to my waist. I held my eyes closed as the light seared through, but I knew if I looked up at it now, there would be nothing left of me. The rough circle pulsed with green light, twitching and spinning around me as the heat intensified. Then, everything was darkness again, rising up around the edges of my mind like a frozen ocean as I plunged downward into unconsciousness.
Mr. Cuomo, it's all right. You're safe now. You're okay.
He's here. I saw him. He looked at me.
Doctor, we're gonna need a sedative in here.
No, don't. He's still out there. Don't you understand? He's waiting for me. For us. Just past the sharp edges of our minds. He's waiting. They told me I had a brain aneurysm, that it led to a stroke. I had been found on the floor of the morgue when the medical examiner arrived that morning, seized up and shaking like I had been electrified. After hours of surgery and weeks of recovery, I had finally woken up. The doctors told me that my mind would be foggy, that my memories would be jumbled, like they'd been through a blender and slapped back into place with paste. They said I might never walk again. But they're not even real. They tried to tell me that my memory was faulty, that I didn't see what I knew I saw. But I knew the truth. A part of me was still there, dangling on the other side of reality's flimsy fabric and floating beneath the godlike beast that patched the holes. Maybe the circle had saved me from Viy, saved my fragile life and my worthless body. But I knew now. I had seen this world for what it is. I had seen the ones and zeros that stack to make reality, and I had been changed forever at the sight. They told me I was crazy, But they took the notebook and pencil away from me when I tried to draw the symbols. They said I remembered wrong, but there was fear in their voices. They knew the truth. They had the digital recorder, even if they claimed all it had recorded was hours of white noise. But more than that, more than any of that, there was one thing that I knew for sure. There was one piece of evidence, one indisputable physical impossibility that they never dared question. And no matter how many of my statements they took, no matter how many times they asked me for my version of that night's events, they could never see outside their programming enough to ask me the only question they knew they had no answer to. If none of it had ever happened, if the only event that night had been a medical emergency, then where had Jane Doe's body gone?
The Circle of Viy was written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and based on the novella Viy by Nikolai Gogol. It was edited by Jeffrey Lavin, with music composed and performed by Samantha Hunt. Agent Quoma, the narrator, was played by Mark Bogumil. Professor Tybury was played by Scott W. Hill. Quinn Farner played the morgue attendant, and Samantha Hunt played the nurse. Gray Matter is a Word Search Media production. Any similarities to real people, places, or things is purely coincidental. Be kind. Rewind.